Greetings, speed demons and armchair strategists. We are back with another edition of F1 Brake Check. It's the season finale under the lights of the Yas Marina circuit in the desert of Abu Dhabi. In this episode, Corey and I are talking about the crazy history and stats of F1 in Abu Dhabi. We'll crunch the numbers for the 2023 season, and in our tech corner, we'll discuss all of the news from the weekend and discuss the upcoming offseason. So strap in, drop the visor, and get ready for the final F1 Brake Check for the 2023 season.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Breen.
All right, so let's talk about the history of the Grand Prix of Abu Dhabi, our weekend at the Yas Marina circuit. The Grand Prix was first held in 2009. It was the first race in F1 history that started in the evening and ended up underneath the artificial lights. So it was the first time in F1 history that had ever happened. The track is 5.3 kilometers long. The lap record is held by Max Verstappen from 2021 with a time of 1 minute, 26 seconds, 0.103. The most poles and wins are held by Lewis Hamilton. Abu Dhabi has the distinction of being the track where Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen, and Nico Rosberg all won their first driver's titles. And some of the top moments from the Grand Prix at Abu Dhabi, starting in reverse order, 2009, which was the first year of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. It was also notable because it marked the end of BMW and Toyota's involvement in F1, and both teams left a pretty indelible mark on the sport of F1. So to see them both exit at that race was a bittersweet end to the 2009 season. Next up, 2010, Vettel wins the race, but this was really notable because it also gave Vettel his first driver's title. But what makes it even more interesting was the fact that when he came into the weekend, he was actually third in the standings. Actually, Fernando Alonso and Mark Webber were actually ahead of Sebastian Vettel in points coming into the weekend. But because both Alonso and Webber brushed the barriers and had damage, Vettel actually came through and won the race. There was also 2012. This one was really an interesting one because Kimi Räikkönen had won his driver's title, had left the sport, actually went rally racing, spent some time in NASCAR, futzed around, and then came back to Formula One driving for Lotus. And a lot of people really questioned his motivation, thinking that maybe he just came back just strictly for the paycheck. But he kind of proved them all wrong when he took and had an absolutely storming drive to win the race in Abu Dhabi, beating out both Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso. 2016, really memorable because it was where Nico Rosberg won his one and only world title. Like his father, he won the title and then promptly retired. So Nico basically said that because of the stress and everything of being under the microscope at Mercedes and everything that it took for him to win the title, and after the first one, he was done. So
I can see that, one and done.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
How many F1 drivers don't even get the chance to win a Grand Prix, much less be a world champion?
Yes, absolutely. And the couple of years that Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton were teammates at Mercedes was a very contentious time for both drivers. I mean, I think we've discussed before on the podcast that actually during those seasons, especially there towards the end, the two of them didn't even speak.
Yeah.
It was basically the garage was divided in the fact that they weren't even sharing data between each other, and the engineers and mechanics weren't even sharing data back and forth.
That's crazy.
So now they've since patched things up and everything, and they're at least on speaking terms. Now, I'm not going to say that they're like best of friends and everything. And, they're not hanging out on non-Grand Prix weekends, even though they only live within a couple blocks of each other in Monaco. But they're definitely far from, still not even close to being the best of friends, which is kind of ironic because there are several pictures that if you go out and Google Rosberg and Hamilton, that they were actually, I wouldn't say that they weren't like super close, but they were very friendly before those last couple of seasons at Mercedes. But once Nico basically let Hamilton know that he wasn't going to back down just because, Lewis at this point was already a multi-time world champion, that Nico was not going to back down in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And I don't think Hamilton was able to actually handle that very well. And there was also quite a few notable comings together between the two. And then probably my most memorable one, of course, I think as a lot of people, is the most recent memorable moment was the 2021 race where Latifi stuffs his Williams into the barrier in the late stages of the race and brings out a safety car, and Lewis is leading the race at the time, and Max has the foresight to dive into the pits before the safety car is able to pick up the front runners, and takes a quick pit stop for brand new rubber. While they're still under the safety car, they take the cars that were already lapped and told them to go around and pack up at the back of the pack. Was literally right on Lewis's tail at the restart. There was a lot of controversy around this because and I'm sure that you remember this, Corey, that there was a lot of controversy around it at the time, because the other team said, well, if you're going to let the ones that were between 1 and 2 go, why not let all of the other lap cars go through as well? This controversy actually prompted the rule change during the off season that then said that all lapped cars would be told to go around the safety car and to pack up in order, so that way at the restart, the cars would actually be in running order for the restart. So Max then takes and pulls off the brilliant move with only, I think, 4 or 5 corners. I think it was in turn 9 is when he takes and pulls off an absolutely storming maneuver, charges down the inside of Hamilton. And at that point, Hamilton couldn't do anything. Max goes on because he had no rubber left. He had nothing to answer for Max, and because Max had brand new rubber on the car with tons of grip, so there was nothing Hamilton could do. And they'd come into the weekend dead level on points, and it was basically whoever finished higher in the points was going to be world champion. And so with Max taking the win and Lewis coming in second, Max takes his first world championship as a driver. Lewis was absolutely, in Parc Fermé, was absolutely inconsolable. He just was in complete disbelief.
Yeah.
And whether you like Verstappen or you like Hamilton or vice versa, or maybe you don't even like either one of them, but I mean, it was controversial. But at the same time, I think that with everything else that was to play for, that I think that the stewards, listening to both sides during the virtual safety car, were lobbying hard. Mercedes was saying, no, you can't let them go. And Red Bull was lobbying hard to say, yes, get them out of the way. Let the drivers fight for the championship on the track. With that in mind, I think that was definitely the way to go. I definitely think that getting those cars out of the way and letting Max and Hamilton fight it out, because they very could have easily had taken each other out. Also, if Hamilton had braked just half a second later, he probably could have held Max at bay through turn 9. And at that point, he could have held him off for the remainder of the lap and gone on to take the championship. So with all those woulda, coulda, shouldas, even if you're not happy with the result, you have to at least understand why that is probably the top moment from the history of Abu Dhabi.
Right. And not that it was Red Bull cheating.
Yes, exactly, because they were not cheating. They lobbied, as we've talked about a number of times, both on the podcast and off. Formula One has and always will be, and like it or not, there's always going to be politics in the sport. That's just the nature of it. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it's always going to be. And the reason why is because you have the money that is involved to the manufacturers, not just the manufacturers like Honda and Ford and Mercedes and the money that's involved with them, but also for the constructors themselves. As they said several times during the Sky Sports broadcast leading up to the Abu Dhabi race, that one place in the standings is equal to roughly $11 million for a team. And when you're talking about that kind of money, there's always going to be politics, because the teams are always going to take and try to do everything they can to better their position, whether it be lobbying for a rules change or allowing a particular part on the car that maybe is kind of right on the fringes of being legal in the rules. One of the most notable of recent memory is Braun GP's double diffuser, and the way that Braun was able to successfully argue that it was legal under the way the rules were written. So you're always going to have these politics. And also because push and pull between the sports governing body and the constructors, unlike in NASCAR and IndyCar and other racing series where you have the governing body, they make the rules, and the rules are basically ironclad, and all of the teams have to abide by those rules if they want to even be part of the sport. Whereas with Formula One, you've got the constructors on one side as a united front, and you've got the governing body and the FIA on the other side. Even to a smaller degree, you also have F1 itself as the media rights holder. So you have this three-way dichotomy between all these entities that are all pushing and pulling for their piece of the pie. That's part of the reason why you've always got so much more politics in Formula One. But enough about the politics lesson. Corey, I've gone on with some of the top moments from Abu Dhabi. Tell me about one of your favorite memories from Abu Dhabi.
I mean, honestly, it has to be 2021 when, Lewis and Max, because you're watching that race before Latifi, pulled a Latifi. And that man, oh my goodness. The one thing you could always count on him for was a nice wreck. But you're watching a race and it's 6 laps left, 5 laps left, something like that. Mm-hmm. And Hamilton has it won. I mean, he's up there, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, something. He up there, it just...
Yeah, he had pretty much dominated the race at that point.
Oh, yeah. It was no doubt about it. In fact, I remember you and I were texting and you're like, no, you need to watch to the end. Because I like, man, I already know Lewis won, so what else is there, right? And that time, they were so neck and neck that whoever won that race was going to become champion.
Mm-hmm.
So that race really, as far as Abu Dhabi goes, really is, I think most people, that race is really solidified in their memories. In fact, on Twitter a few days ago, it was trending, Red Bull cheats. And that's why I brought up, it wasn't Red Bull. And we will not forget or something like that, the hashtags that were trending and everything like that. So
talking about the track itself, just real quick, it's really one of those tracks that when it first was added to the calendar back in 2009, I was one of those people who really did not think that this was going to be, I didn't think it was going to be a very good race. Just simply because of the hype around it and everything about it being the first Grand Prix in the Middle East, and because of all of the money involved and everything. It was something that Bernie had been trying to put together for a number of years. I wasn't real excited about it, but I have to say that the way that the track was built and its design, its nice mix of really fast corners, slow corners, great straightaways, plus as we talked about last week during the, when we were talking about the upcoming race, I think it's cool because it has one of the most unique pit lanes in all of, not just in Formula One, but in all of motorsports, period. In the fact that the pit exit actually winds underneath the track and comes up on the opposite side from where the actual pit lane is at. I think that that's a very, very cool feature. I love the way that it blasts underneath the walkway, the way that it winds through the marina, hence the name, how it got its name of the Yas Marina circuit. Even though there's not a ton of elevation changes like you get in some place like Spa or Coda or things like that. It's really more, it does have some elevation changes, but it's still relatively flat like a street circuit. And actually in some cases, the barriers are very close to the circuit itself. In certain section gives it kind of a street race feel, but all in all, I think it's just a fantastic track. And I think I've talked about it before. I've driven it on the sim dozens of times. I do definitely like the updates that they made, because there used to be that chicane. 5 and 6 used to be more of like a chicane. It really kind of broke up the lap. And when they reprofiled that, it made it a much nicer flow to the way that the track runs. That it's just, I've absolutely fallen in love with this track.
That's cool. Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan. DC was talking about how when he first heard about the tunnel, he was saying, well, fans have just paid a bunch of money to come see F1 cars and you're going to hide the F1 cars. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But barring that, I mean, it is really cool, especially if you're watching it, them going into the tunnel and coming back out of the tunnel. It's a great track. Tons
Yeah.
of speed, tons of opportunities to overtake. So, you know, in my book, I'm always looking for those opportunities where the track allows for overtakes.
Hmm.
Because that, to me, that's one of the best signs of a driver is being able to overtake. And we've seen it. Vettel was a phenomenal pro at that, even in his later years, even before a year or two before his retirement, he was still king. You know, I think he was one of the leaders on his last year in F1. He was one of the top ones as far as overtakes goes. And, you know,
Hmm.
obviously Max and Lewis and Leclerc, all those phenomenal drivers are able to overtake easily, depending on your point of view, I guess. From my point of view, sitting down and watching them, it's super easy. From them, I bet it's a little bit different, but
Yes.
the track is just phenomenal. And you know, like I said last week, I didn't like that Las Vegas was second to last. To me, it should have been a higher profile track, like Abu Dhabi being the last one. I think it's a phenomenal track to be that last track of the season.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm very excited. Abu Dhabi makes me sad
Yeah.
because it has become the final race of the season. It makes me sad the fact that the season is over with when the race is over with. But as far as being a place where it's phenomenal for drama and for exciting racing and things like that, yeah, I think it's just fantastic.
Couldn't agree more, man. It's just such a fun track to watch. And now that you've driven it, actually, I'm sure it's fun. How is it coming out of the pit?
It's a very weird experience. It's like you come out of the pit box and you're driving down, and then all of a sudden it's because of the way that the pit lane is done, you actually drop down and then come back up. You drop down to go through the tunnel, and then you come back up and you're blasting up onto the straightaway and then going right straight into the first corner. And it's very interesting to say the least. and
Yeah,
and
it seems like it
and
would
it
be.
does take, I've played a number of different simulations. I've played ones like Forza, which actually drives you. Once you enter the pit, it takes and actually does all the driving for you until you get to right to pit out. But having driven some of the other, like the Formula One simulators and everything, where you actually do get to drive into your own pit box and out and everything, it's a really interesting and very, very cool experience. And
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest with you, I can see it maybe causing the drivers a little bit of anxiety because they're
Yeah,
blasting out on the track. You know,
sure.
they're basically coming onto it blind, you know, for all intents and purposes. And I can't remember if it was during an F1 race or maybe it was during an F2 race where they actually had a driver actually cut the curve and banged his rear tire and actually ended up, or maybe it wasn't during a race, maybe it was during a free practice or something, but he ended up actually stalling out at the exit just right after the tunnel
Yeah.
and actually ended up blocking several other cars and ended up stacking the whole thing up because the pit lane exit after it goes through the tunnel
Right.
is quite small. So that's part of the reason why they don't allow practice starts at the Yas Marina is
Interesting.
because of the narrowness of the
Mhm.
pit exit.
Wow, that's funny.
Yep. So shall we move on to the tech corner?
Yeah, tech corner.
All right. So this week I thought we would take, and instead of focusing on a particular technology of the cars, I thought what we would do is we would do a season breakdown of some of the numbers. The 2023 season was interesting in the fact, I mean, we had originally had 24 races on the calendar. We ended up running 23. Unfortunately, we lost the Grand Prix at Imola, the San Marino Grand Prix, due to the tragic and heartbreaking torrential rains that happened leading up to the race. I commend F1 for canceling the race. Like a lot of people, I think that they waited just a little too long to actually cancel it. Some of the teams were already there. Some of them were in transit when they finally canceled it. And I really think that F1 should have canceled it a little quicker. But all in all, I think it was the smartest thing to do. The number of countries visited this year was 20 out of 23. It would have been 21 countries had it not been for the cancellation of the San Marino Grand Prix. But we also had 3 races in the US for the first time in almost 40 years because of the cancellation of the San Marino Grand Prix. We actually here in the States, we're the only country to host multiple Grand Prix. this year. Number of tires used. Pirelli wouldn't even publish a final tally, but doing the math of how many tires each team is allocated per weekend and the number of weekends, it means that Pirelli took and provided over 4,000 tires for for the Grand Prix weekends this year. Total miles traveled by the teams. This one was a really interesting stat to me. Total miles traveled was 82,997 miles.
Crazy. Crazy.
Yes, exactly. Between all the flyaway races and everything else, they traveled enough to encircle the globe multiple times. So total miles raced this year was 4,161 miles, which is, for those of us who are in the States, that's actually further than from New York to Los Angeles. So it's only 3,800 and something miles from New York City to Los Angeles. So they actually raced more miles than it would take and drive cross country in the United States. Fastest lap of the year from a time perspective was Max Verstappen at Austria with a time of 1 minute, 7.012 seconds. Fastest pit stop was McLaren at Qatar, which set a world record at 1.8 seconds, which is that fast, it seems like.
No kidding. Even faster, under 2 seconds.
Yeah, under 2 seconds, which is still, I know we talked about it at length after it happened, but it is just, to me, it is just one of those stats that it just boggles the imagination. I mean, when you're talking, 1.8 seconds, that's literally, I still to this day can't hardly fathom. I mean, I remember watching it in real time and thinking, God, that was fast. And it was like, something's going to fall off the car. Somebody screwed something up, but they didn't. As we talked about last week during the podcast, Oscar also had the fastest pit stop of the day at, I think, 1.9 seconds last weekend, or maybe it was 2 seconds flat or something like that. I mean, it was really fast. The fact that McLaren has supplanted Red Bull, because it used to be Red Bull was the class of the field when it came to pit stops.
Yeah, and absolutely.
And as we talked about how much the McLaren has come together as a team since the summer break, that is to me is the key indicator of just how in sync every single mechanic, every single engineer, and the drivers all are at McLaren right now. It's that strength that McLaren's going to be able to take into the off season and really shine come next season.
You're right.
So, and then our last fact was there was only one driver this year who actually completed 100% of all the laps. And that was, of course, our world champion, Max Verstappen. I think it was up to Austria. I think up until that point, Fernando Alonso had also completed 100% of the laps. But then because of his suspension failure, that dropped him out of that running. And then also the other interesting fact is that Ocon actually holds the distinction of the fewest laps completed this season.
Really? That's interesting.
Yes. Huh. Yes.
Well, the other one, I don't see you mention it, but Max, another record that he has now is he's the first one to complete 1,000 laps in a single season.
Yeah. Lead 1,000 laps.
Lead.
Yes. So he's not the first one to complete 1,000 laps, but he's the first one to lead 1,000 laps in a single season. The schedules being what they are now, yes, you have to kind of put the asterisk by it that yes, he led 1,000 laps only because we had so many races this year with 23 races. Back in the 80s and 90s when there was only 16 or 17 races per season, there was no way. So it's one of those records that's kind of, in my mind, you kind of have to put a little bit of an asterisk next to it that it's, yes, don't get me wrong, it's a remarkable record, and kudos on Max and kudos on the Red Bull team for being able to set that record. But at the same time, it's like, if given the same number of races, I definitely think that we would have seen some of the other truly dominant drivers of their eras, like Fangio and Senna and Mansell and Schumacher would have all probably have done the same things in their heydays had the number of races been as many as it is now. But it's still a remarkable record, and it's still a record that I have a sneaking suspicion is going to stand for a very, very long time.
I would imagine so.
Absolutely. And then one other record that Max took this year was the fastest lap award. Because DHL has, for the last few years, has sponsored a award for each race for the fastest lap. And then they also award to the driver who had the most number of fastest laps. And that also distinction also went to Max Verstappen this year with, I believe it was either 8 or 9 races of fastest lap.
Just crazy how dominant he was this year.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be a season for the ages. We've seen other teams have really, really dominant seasons. We had, the McLaren, of the late 80s and early 90s. We've had Ferraris of the early 2000s and such who were just completely dominant in a season. But in those cases, they often had 2 drivers. I'm sorry. And also, I forgot to mention Williams of the early 90s as well, who were also very, very dominant. But they always had 2 drivers that were who were on par with each other with equal equipment and everything like that, who the team itself was super dominant, but no one driver was, or it was very rare to see one driver. I know there was a couple of years where Schumacher was so light years ahead of his teammate. Yeah. There's been other times where a particular driver has been, so far ahead of their teammate, but nothing to the degree like what we've seen this year with Max. And Max is just, as we've talked, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but we have talked, time and time again that he had a dominant car, and he's a driver, probably one of the greatest drivers in the history of Formula One. Yeah. And he took every advantage that he could of having that dominant car and ran with it. Okay, so let's talk news and rumors. Okay, so first of all, after the Las Vegas Grand Prix, Christian Horner let it slip that Lewis Hamilton had actually approached him about joining Red Bull before he signed his multi-year extension. And then later Lewis came out and said, nope, they approached me. I didn't approach them. Yeah. So it's like, what side do you believe?
I look at it this way. If you were thinking about leaving your job and say you're interviewing someplace and this other place, you decide not to take it for whatever reason, it falls through, whatever, they don't like you, whatever that is, right? You don't go to this other job and you're happy and content at your current job. Well, the last thing you want is your current employer knowing that you were talking to somebody else, right? So I tend to believe, I tend to believe the person that has nothing to lose versus the person that has something. Lewis may not have anything to lose from a contractual standpoint, but he could be the less favored. He could not get his setup right. I mean, we've seen this time and time again where drivers aren't fired, but they're fired effectively, right? I mean, Sebastian Vettel is a great example of that. His last couple of years at Ferrari, he wasn't getting anything from his engineers. Nothing. Nope. And he kept asking, well, what do I do here? Are you guys even there? So many conversations about that, so it's definitely something that he doesn't want Toto to know, especially to Red Bull.
Oh yeah,
that is the enemy number one.
Yes.
So anyway, that's who I believe. And for no other reason other than I wouldn't want my current employer knowing that I was talking to somebody else.
Yep.
What about you? What say you?
Well, yeah. Okay. So here's my thinking is I tend to agree with you that yes, I have a tendency to believe the person who, like you said, has nothing to lose or has less to lose. Yeah. But at the same time, I believe Lewis in the semantic way that he has said it. My suspicion is that Lewis told his people, go talk to Red Bull and kind of feel out what it would take to maybe become a Red Bull driver. And his people then contacted Christian. And so when Christian said it, he said, Lewis contacted us, meaning Lewis's people contacted us, which is the same as Lewis contacting us.
Exactly.
Whereas Hamilton is saying, I never talked to him. No, he told his people to go talk to him. And it was his people.
He's not lying.
So he's not lying, but it's semantics. That's my opinion. I think that's what happened is he told his people to go talk to him. His people did go talk to him. Nothing came out of the talks. And then Christian let it slip. And in his mind, yes, Lewis approached us because his people approached us. And you can pretty much say that, okay, he never actually talked to us directly, but his people did. So therefore, and his people are not going to approach us without his knowledge. I can see it happening with maybe a younger driver, a less experienced driver. I can see, maybe there are people, having those discussions without them knowing about it. just simply so that they kind of keep their plausible deniability for their driver.
Exactly.
But I guarantee you that's not happening with someone who has been around the sport as long as Lewis has been. Lewis knows all the ins and outs. He knows all the people. He knows where a lot of the dead bodies are buried. So
exactly.
Of both, former teammates and, engineers and mechanics.
Yeah.
So, I know that I sent you the picture. I had to bring it back up because I think it's still just hilarious that one of the best tweets, that the tweet of the week, or I'm sorry, the X of the week, as we have to start calling it, which I still think is one of the dumbest names ever, but whatever.
Yeah.
Was a picture of Romain Grosjean's burned out Haas, and Romain Grosjean saw it and tweeted back and said, "Hey, can you check in there to see if my shoe's still in there?"
That's a good sense of humor.
Which I think is just fantastic. When you see that burned out husk of the monocoque and just how burned up it really is, you have to say what a testament to the safety of Formula One. The fact that Grosjean was actually able to, he lived to actually make that joke.
Exactly.
That's was the biggest thing that I took away from it, was the fact that the safety cell on the car, as well as the absolute heroics of the marshals to help extract him from the car, for him to be able to get out of the car and for them to be able to be on the scene and get that fire under control as quickly as they did, and to be there to help him when he needed it, is just a testament to the safety of the Formula One car and an absolute testament to the marshals.
He got out with some minor scrapes and bruises and a little bit of burns, but I mean, he walked away.
Yes,
know?
Absolutely. Well, he ran away.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't just walk away. He ran away, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I think we can safely say that had that same accident happened, even as little as maybe 10, 12 years ago, we might be having a totally different conversation right now. It's just the constant efforts of the FIA and the constructors to make the cars and the circuits as safe as they possibly can is just a testament to them. And it's one of the things that when you look back on the history of the sport and you look back into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, before the Grand Prix Drivers Association was started by Jackie Stewart and everything, back when it was not uncommon to lose 3-4 drivers per season, and the fact that everyone just considered it to be okay. And the fact that now that the march of technology and everything is such that, any driver death is now considered unacceptable, and that it's a possibility. But unlike those early days of motor racing where it was acceptable, now it's something that they are actively trying to minimize any chance of it happening. I think it's great for the sport.
Yeah. Well, I think, what was it? It was something special I was watching that, I think it was Enzo Ferrari that was saying, "I'll never get to know a driver because they're not around long enough," meaning that they die so often that why get to know them? They're about to die anyway. So, it's just crazy that was what was acceptable at that point.
Yeah. And it's so very true. Yeah, I'd even forgotten about that. And it's one of those things that once upon a time, it was the team owners and team principals and things like that just considered as, if he dies, next man up. You have to suspect that every single one of the owners or the team principals, managers and things like that all had a short list of, if one of the drivers dies, this is who we're going to go to next. I guarantee you that they had that list that they were keeping somewhere that said, hey, this is our contingency planning if we lose a driver, which is
very probable.
Yes.
And those
which is very, very probable.
So different today,
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about the race this weekend. So we've already thrown a lot of superlatives at Max, but
all season.
All season long. And today we've done it as well, but we have to do one more with Max winning the 19th race of the season. And it was Red Bull's 22nd of the season, Singapore being the one blemish on the record this year that kept them from having a clean sweep, which predicted at the beginning of the season that they wouldn't win every race.
Yeah.
That at
Close.
some point, the close, they got about as close as you possibly could. But that also takes and puts Red Bull as a constructor at the top of the heap because of this, the 22nd win of the year. That takes their winning percentage to 95.4%, which just marginally ekes them out over the all-conquering McLaren MP44 that had a 93.8% win percentage in the season where it dominated and won 15 of 16 races. So like the McLaren, Red Bull dominated to the point where they won all but one race in their respective dominating seasons.
That's
So,
crazy,
but yeah,
man, I mean, just think
yeah.
about how, the competition that they had to go against. So, I mean, these weren't, these weren't rookie drivers that they were going up against. These were seasoned professionals.
Yes,
there's a couple of times that they got close, but for the most part, I mean, Max he was in a league of his own completely.
Yes.
There was no one even close to him. I think the closest was 5 seconds or something like that. I mean, even then, most of the time, 5 seconds is like an eternity. But for Max, I was like, what are you doing? Come on, let's get going here. And that's really after a couple of races when he wasn't that far ahead. He was saying, yeah, I was just managing my tires. I could have pushed a little bit, but I decided not to. Who does that? Is that far up and decides just to kind of, manage the tires a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. When you're in a position where you can be that dominant, you can exactly do that. And for Red Bull, it was a really spectacular year in any measurement that you could possibly put up against them. 22 wins, 19 for Max, or I'm sorry, 21 wins. 19 for Max, 2 for Checo. They finish 1-2 in the drivers' championships. They win their constructors' championship so early that they really didn't even have to show up for the last few races, but because being the competitors that they are, they weren't just happy just winning the constructors championship as early as they did, but to still continue to dominate even after they had nothing to play for all intents and purposes. It's incredible. And this year, 2023 gives Red Bull their 6th constructors championship, which puts them only one behind the legendary Lotus team, who had 7 constructors championships, and it puts them only 2 behind the all-dominating Mercedes team and their 8 world championships as constructors. It's going to be, the next few years is going to be very interesting, just because, as we know, Lotus isn't even in the sport anymore.
Yeah.
And the last constructors championship that Lotus won was in 1978, and they haven't won one since the passing of Colin Chapman. So we know that Lotus will never be able to, never say never, but the chances of Lotus ever fighting for a constructors championship is pretty much zero. But it's now to see how Mercedes is going to respond next year and in the coming years.
McLaren,
and McLaren too, because McLaren also has 8 constructors championships. And to see how those two are going to respond next year, to say, okay, nice job, Red Bull, but we're not going to let you tie us up or surpass us that easily.
Yeah, not again. You get 1 year. 1 year.
Yes, exactly. Because I guarantee you that all of the teams are working flat out. I mean, we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, when we talk about Lewis, but I guarantee you all of the teams are taking every lesson that they learned from this year. And we've got the usual, reshuffling of the deck chairs and people moving between teams and things like that, who are going to be bringing fresh new ideas from their old teams to their new teams. I mean, they can't give away trade secrets and things like that, because they're bound by non-disclosure agreements that even though they've changed teams, they still have to abide by those for a number of years, but they can bring a different point of view and say, okay, well, let's think about trying this. That I guarantee you the other teams are not sitting back on their laurels, and they're going to be working extremely, and not to say that Red Bull isn't working extremely hard, because I mean, they haven't been working on, they haven't done any development on the car since Austin. It's like the last, 4 races of the year, they did absolutely nothing to the car, which guarantee you that means that if they're not doing any development to this year's car, they're already working on next year's car.
Yep. Oh, no doubt about it. They've sunk in a ton of money already in research into next year's car.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guarantee you, with all the resources that McLaren and Mercedes,
Oh yeah.
and to a lesser degree, Aston Martin, they're already full tilt on working on next year's car as well. And
Yeah.
so I guarantee you that Red Bull will not have the kind of dominance
No.
like
No
they
way.
did this year, next year. The teams that were already nipping at their heels, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, they're going to make jumps over the winter break.
Yeah.
And when they break wraps for preseason testing next February, it's going to be real interesting.
Yeah, I completely. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
Next year is gonna be fun
absolutely.
because
So,
where some people were discouraged because Max was winning so many. Next season is gonna be quite a bit different. Just like you
yes,
said, they will not be embarrassed like this again.
no,
And Max
absolutely
even
not.
knows that. He said it
Yes,
during his closing interview that this season was special. He knows that, right? And I
yes,
really think that's why he pushed so much this season because he knows that this year is unique. He's not going to have it easy like this next season,
yes.
or any other season, really.
He took advantage of every
Yeah,
he
exactly.
took advantage of every advantage he had with the dominance of the car, the dominance of the team, the brilliance of Adrian Newey. He knew he had something special. And so, that's why, like what we talked about last week, for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, after Brazil, he went back to the factory in Milton
Yeah.
Keys and spent
Yep.
hours in the simulator because he said, if I don't come to Las Vegas and win, I'll be
Yeah.
disappointed in myself. And
Right.
the only way that he was going to be able to do that was to spend as much time in the simulator as he could reasonably get away with in order to know the circuit as close to inside and out as he could before they even turned first wheel in anger.
Yeah, it's amazing his work ethic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just the fact that even though he had already sewn up the drivers' championship 3 races earlier, he was fighting for his place in history. He was fighting for his place in the record book. And he absolutely cemented his spot in Formula One history and Formula One lore, that he's going to be talked about in the same breath as Fangios and the
Oh yeah, no doubt
Mansells and
about
the
it.
Sennas and the Prosts and the Schumachers and the Vettels. He's
Yeah.
going to be talked about in those same conversations of greatest drivers to
Yeah.
ever turn a wheel. Now let's talk about Checo. Let's talk about the number 2 at
Man, so
Red Bull.
I love Checo, but lately he's been really just aggravating. I
Yeah,
should
that's a
say
good word to use.
annoying. He's been annoying.
Yes.
The way
Yes.
that he just goes about, and let's be honest, seems like he owns the track. He just pushes people out of the way. When he hit Norris, he had plenty of room, and that's why he
Mhm.
got that 5-second penalty. He had plenty of room.
Yes.
He did not have to take that wide of an angle. He did that to get him off track. That's just not unnecessary. And how many other wrecks has he caused or been a part of, within the last few races?
Yeah.
It's not. And before I was giving him a little bit of an allowance, saying, okay, well, it's because he's stressed. He doesn't know if he's going to have, making excuses. But I'm starting to think that maybe this is the way he's driving now. He's really, really aggressive. And to make somebody like Max Verstappen seem like he's not aggressive, that's saying a whole lot right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very true. And the fact that I'm kind of in agreement with you, because one of the hallmarks about Checo's driving in years past has always been the fact that he's a very clean driver. He's
Yep.
not out there banging wheels with people. Earlier this season, he still raced everybody clean.
Yeah.
And it's only been in the last few that it just seems like he's been overly aggressive. So it's like maybe his physio needs to take and change up his supplement stack or something, or and maybe cut back on the testosterone supplements just a little bit. But I agree that he's not driving like himself. He's already sewn up second in the Constructors' Championship for the year. He really didn't need to be as aggressive as he was with Norris. I don't understand it, and it's very inexplicable. Plus, it's like he charged through, had a really great race, charged all the way through, got all the way up to second, and then because of the dust up with Lando, he ends up losing the podium and winds up in 4th place. It's
disheartening, honestly.
Yeah, it really is. It's so I'm hoping that now with the winter break, it'll give Checo a chance to kind of reset and set back and say, hey, this was not a good year. Let's reset, come back refreshed next year. Everybody's back on a level, on a level playing field at the beginning of the season. Let's hit the ground running during preseason testing and show them that I'm back. I'm back to the Checo of old.
Yeah.
So that's my hope.
Me too. He's a fun driver to watch when he's clean. When he's not, it's not fun to watch somebody bang into and ruin other people's races.
Yes, absolutely. He almost reminds me a little bit of a driver who I have never been able to stomach, and that is Will Power in the IndyCar series. And Will Power is probably one of the dirtiest drivers that you've ever seen. And his entire career, he's been that way. But the thing is that he always whines about, I raced him clean. No, you didn't. You were almost always the instigator of these on-track incidents, but he always whines about how so-and-so did this because he's never at fault. It's part of the reason why I can't stand Will Power for that reason. And so I don't want to see, I love Checo. I'm like you. I love Checo, and I really don't want to see him start to become that kind of driver.
Yeah,
so I really want to see him come back next year, a changed man, if you will.
Yep, 100%.
So let's talk about Leclerc's feisty drive. He was pushing Max hard in the opening laps. I mean, it was, and again, I think it was just a matter of kind of along the same lines, that it's just race pace. The Ferrari is blindingly quick. Towards the end of this season, the Ferrari has just been blindingly quick.
Their updates are phenomenal.
Yes, but it's just their race pace still just isn't quite there. To Leclerc's credit, Ferrari had the strategy for a change. They had the strategy spot on. Leclerc was actually able to maintain his position. He comes home in second place, and I think he was only 15, 17 seconds behind Max, which is, that's still a pretty big gap, all things considered. At the same time, it was, like I said, it was really a very feisty drive from Leclerc to prove that, hey, he says, I'm not going anywhere. And he's kind of putting everybody on notice that if Ferrari gives me the proper car next year, I'm going to be in the thick of things.
Yeah, it'll be interesting next year. As great as Leclerc did, we have yet another example of Ferrari just messing up the strategy with Sainz. If they would have done better on the strategy, they could have beat Mercedes. They were praying for a virtual safety car, for a full safety car, to bring Sainz in to replace the tires. That never happened, and they had no contingency. So again, they're waiting and basically lost the constructors' second place because of a bad call.
Yeah,
it was horrible. And yes, I understand that. We'll talk about this here in a second, but he failed to get out of Q1.
I think part of it is like you said, it was for Sainz. His weekend basically boiled down. I mean, it really all stemmed from his crash in FP2.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a hard hit. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, the mechanics did a phenomenal job to rebuild that car. But at that point, you have to wonder what kind of quality. Yes, they had all the spares that they needed to rebuild the car and everything. But what was the quality of those spares? Were they spares that were used earlier in the season that may not have been totally up to spec? You kind of have to wonder that after that, heavy crash in FP2, which that was another one, again, a testament to this, the safety of the sport now. I mean, that was a heavy hit. So it's like you have to wonder, how sore was he after that shunt? How was the car performing? Things like that. You put all those factors together. He doesn't even get out of Q1. So he's already starting on the back foot and has to fight his way through the field. And then again, for like you said, Ferrari they rolled the dice on a safety car, that they rolled the dice on it. And this is a time where it didn't work out in their favor. It was no wonder that Sainz finished so far down. I mean, he was classified as 17th, but he was also classified as a DNF. And I didn't even think about that until literally just now, but it's like Leclerc 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago in Brazil, 4 weeks ago in Mexico, was lamenting about how bad his luck was and how in such a short time his luck has completely turned around. But at the same time, Sainz has gone completely in the dumper.
Yeah, in fact, my prediction for Las Vegas was Leclerc would be bitten yet again, and it's like they have flip-flopped.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
Sainz is now being given really bad advice, strategy advice, and now Leclerc is starting to, if they could just marry both of those, get them on the same track and actually get them into points, it's just frustrating because
Yeah,
they're so good.
They're so good. And plus, with all the resources that Ferrari has and all of the money and all of the resources and everything that Ferrari have, for them to still be this dysfunctional is just, but then again, and I hate to say this, but being an Italian team, they still have this dysfunction. Although I do have to say, Vassar has done a phenomenal job of reducing the amount of dysfunction that Ferrari has. And if he continues to do the outstanding job that he has already done this season and carries that over into next season in eliminating that dysfunction, I think we're going to see a totally different Ferrari team next year.
Wholeheartedly. Yeah. Looking forward to it, actually, because if they can just get the strategy right, they have the drivers. It looked like they had the cars, they had the pace. They needed a couple of tweaks. And really, this is why Binotto was let go, is because of all the bad strategy. If they can get that part right next season, we could see a much stronger showing from Ferrari next season. So who knows? Maybe they could win the championship, or maybe we would have Leclerc higher. He lost out, unfortunately, but in the drivers' championship.
All right. So real quick, we already touched on the McLaren resurgence. They had another really, really strong weekend, really strong qualifying. And had it not been for the crash with Checo, Lando would have probably placed much higher. I think at one point he was actually running in third because Piastri had qualified third, and Lando on can't remember if it was on lap 1 or lap 2, but maybe it was lap 3 that Lando got around Oscar and was running in third.
Yeah, it was early on.
Lando was on it this weekend, and Piastri, for all intents and purposes, with just a little bit of bad luck going the other way, he would have been placed even higher than the 6th that he finished in. But it's just, I think that McLaren has just got so much momentum behind them now to carry into next season that I'm super excited to see. I cannot wait for them to break wraps at preseason testing next year. And unlike the last 2 years where they were kind of fudging some stuff in preseason testing to try to make themselves look a little better, I'm pretty sure that this next season, when they break wraps, they are going to be on it and on it hard. And I don't think there's going to be as much pulling all the weight off the car and everything in order to turn some impressive lap times.
George had a really good showing this race. Much better than, unfortunately, my prediction of Hamilton making the podium did not pan out. But George made it. He's by default, right? Checo was really second, but nobody's to blame but himself. He caused that crash. So personally, I think that he got off pretty easy on that 5-second penalty, but it did cost him 2 spots, and it cost Ferrari quite a bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, I'm just going to throw this out here that once again, I hate the 5-second penalty. Formula One, FIA, go back to the drive-through penalties. These 5-second penalties of just adding 5 seconds to the end of the race, or making it so that they can't work on the car for 5 seconds when they come into the pits. Drive-through penalties. Or even if you don't want to do that, make them drive through the institute a penalty box. Make it so that there's a spot, like hockey, make up a spot where they have to slow down and stop in this box for so many seconds before they can take back off onto the track. In the early and mid 90s, where they would do a time penalty, but they weren't allowed to, they would actually have to pull into the pits, stop in the pit box. The crew was not allowed to work on the car at all. The driver would have to come in, serve the penalty, and then go back out, which I always thought was a little too severe. The pit lane speed limit, that a drive-through penalty is sufficient enough in a case like this. But I'm done. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. Look at Max in Las Vegas. He basically laughed at 5 seconds. He's like, I'm so far up. It doesn't matter. You give me a 10-second penalty. I don't care,
Yeah, exactly.
Makes no difference to drivers like that.
And it's just like 2021 when Lewis punted Verstappen off at Silverstone, and he got a 5-second penalty, and it was a joke because he won by such a large margin that the 5-second penalty was a complete and utter joke. And that's the first time you and I talked about how much I hated the 5-second penalty and how I really wish they would go back to the drive-through penalty, making them drive through the pit lane. And then that way, there's not any of this, we'll just keep pushing and try to eke out a 5-second gap over whoever's next so that it doesn't count. No, make it something legitimate, because when they have to do a drive-through, if the person behind them passes them, then that means they actually have to get past them on the track in order to get that spot back. This whole, at the end of the race, now once we've assessed all the penalties, now this is the final run, the final finishing order. It's like, no.
Yeah.
When they pull into park from A, we need to know that this is the finishing order. This whole time penalty thing. I've beaten this horse to death. FIA, Formula One, if you're listening to me, go back to the drive-through penalty. I'm done.
Please.
Let's talk about Hamilton. So for George this weekend, Hamilton had just the opposite. This whole weekend, all of the top teams seemed to have a Jekyll and Hyde situation where you had one driver who was just phenomenal and another driver who was just not on the same page. Yeah. And Hamilton seemed to be in the same boat in the fact that he doesn't even make it out of Q2. He ends up finishing 9th. And at one point he's complaining, over the radio to the team. He's like, what is wrong with my car? Now I have a thought on that. But well, I'm starting to wonder if after the last couple races, is Hamilton starting to lose the fire, or is it just that he's just so dejected this season? He's not feeling it right now, as I say in air quotes. He's not feeling it, but maybe this break is exactly what he needs. He needs to go lie on a beach with a bunch of supermodels and everything and come back next year with a different mindset. George has been outclassing Hamilton the last couple races, so you can't boil it all down to the car. You can't say that it's just strictly the Mercedes the reason why Hamilton has not gone as well the last couple races of this season. Even when they were doing the pre-race interview with Lewis while they were doing the parade laps pre-race, when they asked Lewis, he seemed very dejected. Like he was already beat, having qualified so badly that before the race, he was already beat. And it's just, you have to wonder, is it a matter of, is he losing the fire, or he just needs a reset from this season?
I don't know, man. It's funny because after the 2021 season and he lost, because he's wants that 8th win, the 8th championship. Yeah. But after he lost that to Max, you and I, before we started the podcast, you and I were commenting on this, how he just was a different driver. Yeah, there's porpoising problems with the Mercedes and everything like that, but he himself didn't look like Lewis Hamilton. He didn't look like the driver that we all know. He looked like, I don't know, he didn't look the same. I saw sparks of it this season where he looked like he was back to normal, but like you said, the last few races, I don't know, maybe that fire is gone, or maybe he just needs a reset over this season.
We'll see. Time will tell. All right. So the next thing we got to talk about Yuki's balls out. We have it later in the rundown to talk about Franz Tost's exit from Formula One. Tost has been the longtime boss at AlphaTauri, previously Toro Rosso. He's brought along a lot of great drivers that have gone through the quote-unquote junior team for Red Bull. You've got Albon, you've got Max, you've got Gasly came through the Red Bull, Vettel came through the Red Bull, Webber. I mean, you've got some of the greatest names in the sport who have ever driven all came through the Red Bull program under Tost. So Yuki being one of those guys that has come up through the ranks under the Red Bull Driver Academy and under the tutelage of Tost. And so he really grabbed a hold of this weekend, and he even had a commemorative helmet created specifically for this weekend with a picture of he and Tost on the top of it. And Yuki truly loved him. And even at the beginning of the race over the radio, he said, hey, let's do this one for him. Let's go out there and just give it everything we got. And so he pulled out a qualifying that it's probably one of the best qualifying sessions that I've ever seen out of Yuki, and just really, really impressed.
No doubt about it. It was his first time he won driver of the day from F1 because of his drive. I mean, it was just beautiful.
It was inspired. I mean, that's the
really
only word that I
You're
can
right.
use for it. It was just inspired, and good on Yuki, because I always liked Yuki. It's like there's been some knocks on him, especially in the past seasons.
How aggressive, how mean he would be to his engineers.
Yes, exactly. How aggressive he was to his engineers, how he often was somewhat lax on his preparations, both from a driving and car setup standpoint, but also from his fitness and things like that. And I've always liked Yuki. He's always a very personable guy. You kind of are happy to see him when he does well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know we've even on this podcast have had our knocks on Yuki, but I think that this last drive to end the season, I think this is what he was really wanting, is he was wanting to go out on a quote unquote high note and have a really good showing to go into the off season.
No, it's fantastic. And Danny Rick, he had some issues, but started
15th.
Yeah, and then finished 11th. So he
just right outside the points. I mean, he was within, I don't even remember what the gap was, but it was not much. I mean, it was like a blink of an eye out of the points. And had it not been, I think, what was it? I think it was his second stop, took just a little bit longer. And had he not had that hold up, I think he would have been in the points for the final race of the season. So we've talked about it many times about how happy we are to see Danny Rick back driving. That's another driver that I still don't think he's still 100% after the hand surgery, that I got a sneaking suspicion that this time away for the next 2 months, for him to finish healing and everything and get his mind right, is, I think next year is going to be super fun to watch.
Yeah, and what he can do with the AlphaTauri, I'm really excited about that.
Absolutely. And then also, as we have talked a number of times, that if Checo comes out of the gate next year and not on par with Max, how quickly are they going to be willing to swap seats between Checo and Danny Rick? We'll have to wait and see how that turns out next year. All right, so for all of the good that happened to AlphaTauri, we have to talk about Haas, who once again,
poor Haas.
I especially feel for Gunther, because Steiner has become such a big figure in the sport. He's always, even when he was at Jaguar, he always had such a huge personality.
Yeah.
But people outside of the sport didn't know that. And now, because of Drive to Survive and him getting more exposure on the Sky telecasts and things like that, the guy supposedly has in the works, he's got a television sitcom in the works with CBS. Yes, apparently. He is working on a sitcom loosely based on himself for CBS next season. So I feel bad for him. You want to talk about somebody else? Hulkenberg had a qualifying session, that was just unbelievable. But once again, the car completely underwhelms once in race trim. He goes from an amazing qualifying of 8 and ends up in 15th because the car just dropped off so much.
Yeah.
And poor K-Mag ends up finishing dead last on the day. Of course, Haas finishes up at the bottom of the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah.
And
very dead last.
Yes, dead last. So for every good thing that happened for Aston Martin and McLaren during the season, and how they went from their mediocre showings of 2022 to where they finished up in 2023, Haas is they've got to be just ready just to chuck this year, just be so happy that this year is over with, and that next year they can hopefully come back with a much better car that's not only just fast on Saturday, but is fast on Sunday.
Like you've said it a couple of times in the podcast, if they could just match what they do in qualifying and put that into race day, we'd have a strong competitor. But oh my gosh, they fall off so quickly.
And it's not even just like over the course of,
no, it's fast.
It's 2 or 3 laps. They go from, I mean, you can even see it, if you go back and look at like their telemetry.
Yeah.
Their lap times from the time that they come back out of the pit after a stop on fresh rubber, and how quickly their lap times fall off from where they're at with fresh rubber to 3-4 laps into a stint, and then so that by the end of a 12, 15, 16 lap stint, the drivers are just struggling just to keep the car on the road.
I know.
It's
like they're on ice.
Yeah, exactly. Gene and Gunther and the whole crew are just ready to say, this season sucked. It's over with. Let's go back to the
Let's not
factory
repeat.
liquor wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's build a better race car for next year.
So on to
Aston, Williams, Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo, like I said, we talked about it last weekend. They had given up on the car. They were basically at the bottom of the timesheets most of the weekend. They had a pretty dismal race. Let's not beat that dead horse while it's down. I think that I'm hoping that they'll have a better car for next year. It's going to be really kind of boiled down to is how much of their resources are they using on next year's car? And how much are they looking forward to, and how much resources are they putting into the 2025 car? How much are they putting into the car now, and how much are they putting in reserve for when Audi takes over? Williams is another one that you just gotta kind of shake your head, because Albon during practice and everything looked really good, but then come qualifying had a pretty big drop off, had more of a drop off during the race. Williams is another one of those teams that I think is just, they're ready to move on to next season. And you got to kind of wonder, it's like, will Williams ever see anything even approaching their glory days of the 80s and 90s? Or are they destined to be a perennial back of the midfield for the rest of their days before somebody else comes along and buys them and renames them? Who knows?
Yeah.
Just real quick on Aston, they weren't anything remarkable during the race. And for a team that has as much resources as what they have now, and what Papa Stroll is throwing into the team and everything, and they started off the season with so much promise and then tapered off, that you have to kind of wonder, okay, now they work on, not only do we have to make a car better for next year, but we also have to finish stronger. We can't have that mid to late season drop off.
Yeah.
We can't come out of the gate strong and then drop off. We got to stay consistent throughout the year. Back on the subject of Williams, though, we also have to take and talk about Sargent.
Yeah.
So Sargent also had a pretty horrible weekend. Didn't even set a time in Q1. So ends up starting in 20th position again. I'm completely flabbergasted, because it's like he has shown at times that he can be really, really fast. I mean, look at his qualifying from Las Vegas just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But then during the race, his pace just fell off so much.
It's horrible. Yeah.
And
if he gets a contract next season, he will be the luckiest person alive by far.
Absolutely.
There's so many other people to choose from. You can pull from F2. You could pull from F3. I mean, there's so many resources that you can pull from. Why are you pushing this person? He's not.
Which is so sad, because we were just talking about it last week, that 2 weeks ago at Las Vegas,
2 weeks. He was looking great. Yeah. Yeah. His confidence up.
We thought for sure that they were going to announce his contract extension. We've heard rumors that the contract extension is already in place.
The official X profile for Williams said he's getting another year. And then how do you go from that and then have a race like Bahrain? It doesn't make sense. Williams is too good of a team. Don't spend your time on this driver.
No,
or
totally
have
agree.
him go into development like they did for Danny Rick until they ironed out some of his bugs. But,
put him back as the reserve driver for now.
Yep.
And so I don't know. And it's so inexplicable, because like I said, just 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how impressed we were, how much of a turnaround he'd made. And then no sooner had he made the turnaround and we had talked about him and talked him up, that he falls off again. So it's just, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. It's like, I would love to see Sargent get a little more of a chance. I guess what I'm trying to say is Williams is going to have to make a really difficult decision. But the thing is, though, is that I guarantee they're already developing the car for next year. They're going to have to make a decision really quick. If they keep Sargent, they got to make sure that they're working with him during the offseason to make sure that he is fully prepped and ready for next season. Or if they're going to drop Sargent, go with someone else, they need to make sure that that individual is also ready for next season.
And maybe that's what they're thinking of. We keep this guy Sargent around for one more season, because then we don't have to train somebody on our new car. Maybe that's it, but I don't know. It seems like they could bring somebody else up faster than what Sargent's doing.
No, totally agree. So I guess probably next week or two, it's going to be real pivotal for Sargent. I'm pretty sure we're going to get some kind of announcement and some kind of closure on this whole subject from Williams within the next week or two.
All right. So our closing for the year.
Yeah. All right. So you ready to bring this home?
Yeah.
All right, then. Okay. So the checkered flag is waved on the 2023 season, and what an epic ride it has been. Thank you, everyone, for supporting us on our maiden season. Corey and I, like the teams, are going to take a short break, and we'll come back in 2 weeks' time. During the off-season, we will pontificate on the latest news and rumors, and each week we'll discuss some of the finer points of F1. We're going to talk things like safety cars versus virtual safety cars. We're going to look back on some of our favorite races in history, and we're going to discuss things like why we love F1 and a number of other subjects. We'll also bring you some of the zaniest on and off track moments from the history of the sport. You can follow Corey on X, formerly known as Twitter, at MCBF1BC, and you can yell at me at Scott_D_Vic. Until then, ta-ta.
Thank you for listening to F1 Great Chat. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher. Also, help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. We value your feedback and passion, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, stay inside track limits and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.